Today, fear is 24/7, 365. The system was never designed for prolonged fear and stress as we are experiencing in today's world. Well, I have a feeling that the fear is much more powerful in influencing us than the things like the cell phones and the energy fields and all that. You know, let's go back, because a big fear is, electromagnetic fields. That's been a big fear, and there should be a concern, because biological systems employ electromagnetic fields and vibrations and energy in controlling and manipulating the biology. So if the energy fields around us are altered, they surely can have an effect. And I say, well, is everybody affected by this? And I say, look, when we were afraid because high power, high tension lines, the ones that carry the big load of electricity, and people live underneath those lines, they assessed, is there any difference in the health of people who live under the high power tension lines? And they find out, yeah, for sure, people are affected. You got, more health issues of people living there. And then I go, is everybody affected? And this is where it comes down to the important part. No, not everybody was affected. Those that were affected were already under stress. So stress exacerbated the problem. Those people who weren't under stress, living under these lines, have no problem. So stress is opening up our system from attack, from anything from electromagnetic fields to viruses, and we have to understand that stress is the bigger problem in the immune system. And so, just to give an example, they follow the fate of children who are adopted into families where there's cancer. I say, so what? I say, it turns out the adopted child will get the same family cancer as the siblings get, with the same probability. I go, yeah, but what's different? I go, the adopted child came from totally different genetics, and the cancer is running in the family. And what's the point? Cancer is not due to genes. Cancer is due to not living in harmony. And all of a sudden it says, well, then how do you fight cancer? And I say, well, we kill all the cancer cells. I go, the cancer cells are a symptom. The problem is not living in harmony. You can kill all the damn cancer cells you want, but if you don't change the problem, the cause, a cancer will come back again. And so there's a misunderstanding about genes and victimization. We're all perceived as victims of our heredity when we are absolute masters. We control our genetics, and that's the most important fact that people have to understand. What is so important? If we do not...
For those of you who have seen the movie The Manchurian Candidate, you'll find this interview beyond intriguing. Dr. Nick Begich has spent the last decade investigating the use of 21st century technologies and their effects on our brain. It probably doesn't surprise you to know that technologies that produce this effect on people actually exist. Let's hear what Dr. Begich has to say about these well-cloaked technologies. As we've been talking about some of the 21st century technologies, one area that can't be ignored is that our brains are being affected by a lot of external forces, electromagnetic, radio frequencies, etc. Can you give us a little bit of background in the ways in which we're being impacted at this time?
Sure. You know, this area is we consider the most controversial area that we've covered in the last 11 years, and it's an area that I'm committing the next 5 years to educate the public around the world on, because I think it is the most important technology. The idea of interfering with the human brain, either from external sources without our consent, is a significant issue for me. In the United States, according to Secretary of Energy O'Leary, when she was in that position under the Clinton administration, she had said that over 500,000 Americans in a 40-year period had been victims of human experimentation in the United States without their consent. You know, from syphilis being given to black men in the southeast to see how they would die over time, to radioactive iodine and opiates in Alaska to see how they would die over time, and many, many other things. One of the most extraordinary reports came out in the early 70s during a number of congressional hearings, and there was actually a presidential report issued in June of 1975, and it was on CIA abuses within the United States, and it was a report to the president. What was contained in that was a chapter talking about mind manipulation using chemical means and programs, MK Ultra and their associated programs run by the Central Intelligence Agency. And all of these things are referenced in our written work. We have hundreds and hundreds of reference sources. But when you look at what they were doing then, it was primarily chemical means. At least that's what made it into the literature. When you go back even further, if you go back to, say, the Korean era, in that era we had servicemen returning from warfare, and they were exhibiting these very bizarre behaviors. These patriotic young guys were coming back and handing communist leaflets out on street corners, and this is where the term brainwashing was actually coined, was in that era. And so our government began to look, can we, what did they do and can we do it too, became the equation. And so as you look all the way into the 50s and into the early 60s, these technologies were being explored. By the early 60s, we had captured a device. It was actually during the Vietnam era. We captured a Russian device called the LIDA machine, L-I-D-A, which was actually looked at by a guy named Ross Addy, one of the leading researchers, again, for military. He looked at this, and it was used for putting military prisoners of war into trance-like states using flickering lights and sound and electromagnetic field oscillations, so that you would get in a very relaxed state, in a state where they could extract intelligence much more efficiently from you. And that became a whole new review for military technologists in this country, thinking maybe we can use electromagnetic fields to manipulate what's going on in the brain. In 1969, there was a book published called Towards a Psycho-Civilized Society, and this was put together by Jose Delgado, and he had his doctorate in electrophysiology from the University of Madrid from 1950. He came over to Yale University in the mid-60s and began mapping the human brain, stimulating the human brain in primates and bulls and animals, all different kinds of animals, stimulating different parts of the brain to see what parts were responsible for what kinds of actions or cognitive functions and so on. So what he was doing in those days, in the 60s, was he was implanting microcircuits, and then, or not microcircuits, circuits, and stimulating with RF, radio frequency energy. So one of the illustrations or photographs shows a charging bull coming at him, and he throws the switch and the bull stops right in front of him. Well, by the mid-80s, he figured out you didn't need any implanted technologies. All you needed to know was how to modulate the right frequency.
My name is Robert David Steele. I'm a former Marine Corps infantry officer, former spy for the United States of America, and I am the champion for open source everything engineering, which will lift the 5 billion poor at 10% of the cost of the failed Western economic paradigm.
What is the main issue now you think you are following right now?
Well, I think it's a combination of cryptocurrency, a post-Amazon, post-Google internet that cannot be manipulated, and extending open source everything engineering to the entire world, starting in the Middle East, so as to create peace. We basically have got to stop wars, and we've got to stop waste.
There have been always kind of wars in the Middle East, and some wars are really questionable why these wars are going on, and as a result, the whole country was destroyed, such as Iraq. What do you think the reason for that? What is the background?
Although I recognize the book by Peter Dale Scott on the deep state, I am the foremost spokesperson calling out the deep state. All wars are bankers' wars. All wars are about making a profit for the 1% by consuming the 99%. Iraq was a bankers' war. All wars also have a very strong Zionist component. Israel is doing everything it can to destroy the Middle East, including Syria. It has stolen the Golan Heights from Syria, which have oil under them, and it has stolen water from Jordan for the last 30 or 40 years. One of the things that open source everything engineering does is it educates publics. I have recently been published in the Russian International Affairs Council website to the effect that the American public is the center of gravity for peace. Right now, all U.S. media, including what we fondly call the crap news network, CNN, are lying to the American public. It is absolutely essential that we create a truth channel, and unfortunately Russia Today and Press TV are not doing the job.
Ronald, you have a very strong background in the financial sector, asset management, deposit trading. As far as I understood, can you tell us something about your experiences? For how long did you work there?
Well, my experiences are more complicated than what you mentioned just now. Actually, I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. Independence being the key component to me. I have once tried being an employee, but that didn't work out. Being an entrepreneur, I have seen many sectors, amongst which I have experienced the financial world. All my other companies as an entrepreneur, like my own fashion line for ladies, car dealership and also import-export, had me involved to such an extent with building up my own fortune. It inherently guided me into the world of finance. Working in import-export, you encounter different currencies and you have to go to the exchange to trade through brokers. And one of the brokers said at some point, "Ronald, I've been looking at your life for a long time and you are always busy. You earn money, we know, but what is your goal?" And I replied, "The only goal I have as an entrepreneur is to earn as much money as I possibly can. Because, the more money I have, the quicker I can retire, be free and of course have status. Basically everything you want in this society, or at least, that's what I thought back then." So the broker said, "In that case, stop what you are doing now, stop with all those companies and just start dealing money, go into the financial world." And that is the beginning of that situation that is connected to your original question. The broker had a place in the exchange market and he dealt in currencies, deposits, so trading in assets to make money out of differences in interest rates, and that involved the aforementioned asset management. Those three aspects together formed the interested package I said yes to. He said, "All right, you can take my place here, I'll train you, introduce you into the network, but in exchange I want 10% of your annual earnings." So he basically sold me his spot in the financial world and asked a 10% commission, which I paid him. I said, "Yes, fine with me." Then he replied, "There is one thing you need to know. If you can't put your conscience in the proverbial freezer, and I don't mean on -18 degrees, but on -100 degrees, then don't get involved in this." That was the message. You want a lot of money, you can obtain that, I can help you, but it comes at a great cost. Because you cannot do this with a clear conscience. Well, I laughed at that. I was young and naive. From my youth, from the way I came into life, my far from ideal youth led me to develop a certain view of the world and humanity.
What do you mean by that? No warm, loving family?
My mother always did the best she could to make us feel loved. But she was hampered by that due to the behavior of my father, who caused us to feel more like we lived in a war zone with each other. That isn't an exemplary situation to grow up in. And as a child growing up like that, led me to believe that the world and humanity are far from great.
So putting your conscience in the freezer was fitting in as a starting point?
I was partially already used to doing that out of self-preservation. So to put my conscience in the freezer was not an impossible task to me.
So it became a survival mechanism to you?
Yes, yes. And my view of humanity and the world around me wasn't exactly positive either. I only thought of myself, that the way I grew up to be out of self-preservation, and I got into that deal. Which meant that slowly I built up a customer base. And as I improved my skills within the network, I got deeper into the financial world. And then it turns out the world is really small, and you keep noticing that. Even when I was still working in import-export, dealing in grain and such, you notice it is just a small circle. And if we talk about the hardcore circle in the financial world, I don't mean Miss Jean at the bank, but the big global flows of money which you use for trading.
You are talking about worldwide cash flows, so not the Netherlands in particular where you started working?
The Netherlands do play a distinct part in this story, but the world does not revolve around it. The Netherlands are a part of a large global financial system, in which you work through exchange market if you want to do official transactions. And many banks, who do the currency exchange, get certain assignments from clients, which they can't get away with easily. Then the need arises for people like me, to were the straw men where big money flows are involved. We used certain financial constructions, international legislation, to move money in such a way making everything okay. So all supervisors, regulatory bodies that are in place worldwide, because they are, that no one wakes up seeing what is going on, like a year or two ago, with the scandal around Panama.
The Panama Papers.
Yes.
Tax evasion.
I think, well, it was about avoiding taxes. Tax evasion is when you break all the rules. This had to do with avoiding. But when you see what happened there, I'm like, guys, that is old news. And who are you bring with that, because it is peanuts and hardly relevant. However, for the common people, that is great news, but it is not anything big, but it does show there is something very wrong in this world. For example, there are people in the Netherlands, with certain positions, who have bank accounts in Panama, with legislation that allows them not to pay taxes in the Netherlands, which is completely legal. Constructions like that were part of my job. When we had to change currency, we had changes, the first boycotts in Iraq in the early 90s. When there was a boycott in Iraq because of the war that started there. And we were confronted with what we called Iraqi dollar. Iraqi dollars, which were actually American dollars. The American dollar has a direct relation to the oil prices, which made it a world trading currency backed up by oil. As long as that connection is in place, the dollar has a value. Officially, the Iraqi people weren't allowed to sell their oil due to the boycott. In theory, that is, because never before there was such a big business in oil. With discounts in this case, because officially it wasn't allowed, so with discounts it still crossed the borders. These dollars, because the energy was always paid in the dollars, so the Iraqi dollars had to go somewhere. You couldn't just take them to the desk at the bank because of all the regulations and checks did provide a certain protection. Because money laundering and criminality wasn't anything new back then. Now we call it terrorism. But that was then also the case. So, then you need people to take the heath. As straw men, you got invited to a bank, for example, in Germany's, with basements full of trucks filled with money. And then you think, sure, trucks, transports, a busy company. Come with me, then they show you they are all filled to maximum capacity with dollars. And they tell you we need to get rid of all this cash. So change them pounds, German marks, this, that, in such way, and it needs to go there and there.
Are we now talking about money laundering?
Well, processing cash. Processing cash in such a way that we can legally reintroduce it into the money circuit.
So that was your task?
That was an assignment my colleagues and I got. You are never alone on an assignment, because you cannot do this on your own. It is not possible. We all know Scrooge McDuck scooping money with his shovel. Well, we literally had to do that over there. It was impossible to process all at once. So, then you need to find a way. Cash used to be the predominant way of paying, where nowadays most is digital. But you tried to find a way to process the cash. How do you reintroduce the cash into the circuit so Iraq can deal in its soil without being hampered? Because they are the ones that own the money. Iraq doesn't want. Look, you mentioned money laundering, but what it was about the boycott, Iraq had to stick to the rules, and buy, you know, everything you want to know about the world. You can know by following the money. That is the bottom line. Everyone can say blah, 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 but make sure you follow the money, then you'll find the truth. Same thing goes for that situation. So the only thing Iraq and their buying partners wanted was to remain free of any accusations. Because the partners who bought it were the ones placing the boycott in the first place, but they are actually all friends on the same side. Everybody thinks there are opposites like good and bad guys in the world. But on the higher levels, it is just a game and they are all working together. However, they do have to stick to the rules and regulations they themselves have created to keep the rest of society suppressed and make sure that it will not be too crowded at the top. So you have to play by your own rules. So what is going on there is to make sure that nobody can trace you, apart from the elite themselves. Nobody in lower ranks can find out what really happened.
Compartmentalized, that's how we call it.
Yes.
Everyone knows only his own little piece. Only the elite knows what is happening.
Yes, but because we were doing the dirty work, we had to know a lot. Because we couldn't afford to make any mistakes.
How high in the pyramid did you get? Were you close to the top of the pyramid?
Well, we were communicating with them. My ego would have loved it when I got to this position of belonging to the top itself. Nowadays we still talk about 8,000 to 8,500 people in the world who run the entire world. It would have been amazing to get into such a position back then.
Alright, but if we say the top knows 100%, can you estimate how much you knew and understood of what happened?
In my work, I had to know 100% of what was going on. There was no other way, because of the interests of the people involved were huge. Especially for the top. If I wouldn't know all the details, I would end up making mistakes. Which would cause a spin-off, because those mistakes would be detected. Then the people that don't know anything about it would interfere. We are talking about having nerves of steel to function at this level.
So did you have nerves of steel?
Yes, it worked just fine.
The freezer worked very well for you.
Yes. I played at the highest level for about 5 years. and then it was totally over, out and done with. That was a very intense moment for me.
That happened suddenly?
Well, no, the thing is, I gave a small example of what was involved. So, in this case, currency exchange, dollar to something else, deposited in a safe manner, and managing assets well, so it could grow to rate of return, leading to reinvestments with the money. The level I played at in those 5 years. And that didn't happen overnight, you need to earn your place. I am skilled at connecting the dots, information in order to achieve a full picture of all the things involved. That need to be taken into account within the playing field. Which is a very detailed process. You stand out when you are gifted in this. This is the reason I was trusted with the full 100% of the information where it concerned my jobs. So, I didn't know about everything they knew, but everything that I needed to know regarding the case I was working with colleagues. I was often put in the leading role, because I kept a good overview of the situation.
You're good at making quick switches.
Yes, and I was good at innovative thinking to solve the problem. I had fun, creating solutions in such a way to always stay ahead and outsmart them. Staying within the rules of the game but playing around with them to make everything match up. I loved that game. However, on the other hand, you had a great amount of responsibility and you learned more and more about the real world, since through the financial world you learn all of the actual truth.
So you say all, in what regard?
Well, your clients give you glimpses of how the world really works. In hindsight, I still didn't know everything. But I did know a lot. Because my clients were banks who didn't want blood on their hands. But within those banks there always is a number of people who know damn well what is going on. So, like 1% within a bank knows the truth of the matter regarding the happenings within the world. Which is not surprising, considering they are involved in the flows of money. Those are your clients. You also have governments to deal with, multinationals. You have to deal with secret services, and what they now call terrorist organizations. You get all of the groups that are involved with the big money as clients. Then you start seeing the connections, so, they might be compartmentalized as you just mentioned, regarding knowledge. But because I am in the middle I see how they relate to another. You see the money coming from this place, then going to that place, etc. You keep gaining information and thereby an overview of what is really going on.
So do you have to serve and keep all of those groups happy, including terrorist organizations? You were trying to keep everybody happy?
Yes.
My God.
That was my job.
Keeping all the balls in the air.
Yes, indeed. So one of the things that I found out, I did not know that before, but now I do, is about secret services. You think they are there to serve and protect a people, country, etc., but they actually turn out to be the criminal organizations, to be more precise. The system is heavily so. We are talking about financing wars, creating wars, so basically creating a lot of misery in this world. So, lots of conflict. And then I think to myself, if only people knew what the world is really like. Secret services will stop at nothing. Nothing. But they also have their flows of money, because if they are trading in drugs or weapons or, for that matter, people, all that money has to go somewhere. Everything has to be financed.
You say if, but you could confirm they are doing this?
All of them? All of them? So the entire world as we think we know it, is just an illusion we believe in. Which is something you find out in this line of work and where it all went wrong for me, to put it that way.
Right. You mean, finally that is.
In hindsight, yes, it was for the best, but my freezer started to malfunction. There were things happening. For example, I went to a different trade market and one of my colleagues there said, "Ronald, you remember that case with the Italian lira? I sometimes mention that during talks as well. Do you remember those deals, in which we did massive dumping of the lira, which reduced the value of the currency? Which caused a company in Italy to be hit in such a way, they went bankrupt. And then you hear at the exchange, you remember that successful deal with the lira? Yes. And then they say, did you know that the owner committed suicide and left a family behind? Things like that. And back then we laughed at it. Altogether, all of us. We looked down on people, mocked them. It was just a product, waste. Everything was worthless trash. Nature, the planet, everything could burn and break.
Just useless parasites.
Just as long as we met our goals, as long as we were growing, many of my colleagues ended up drinking or using drugs. Not me. Maybe I should have.
Or not.
No, in hindsight, it was for the best and I'm happy to still be alive. However, all those horrible things started to eat at me.
Can you give an example? Because I can sense a lot of terrible things happen to you.
Yes. It is difficult for me to talk about.
I can feel that, but only whatever you wish to share is all right.
Yes. I only talk about things I want to tell. But it does evoke lots of emotions, and with my conscience not being in the freezer, it touches me deeply.
Yes, I feel the same way. All right. Can you tell me the worst thing that has happened that caused the tipping point in your situation?
Well, that was the beginning of the end. You get so deep into these circles. And you sign a lifetime contract, not with blood or anything, to never disclose names of companies, organizations or people. I think that is why I am still alive. You have to stick to it. If we are talking about the worst things that I have experienced, I just told you about things that made the freezer glitch. My conscience started to show itself. Let's put it this way. I was training to become a psychopath and I failed. I did not complete the training and didn't become a psychopath. My conscience came back, and the most difficult part for me was, because I had such a great status there, I was a success. I was trusted with the people playing at this level.
Mensen in deze wereld die dus op dat niveau speelden.
To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale. God doesn't exist. None of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer. And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. So, I visited these churches, just as a visitor, dropped by. And then they were doing their holy mass with naked women and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and was far from convinced if any of this was real.
It was just a spectacle to you.
Yes. In my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. I didn't make the connection yet. So I was a guest in those circles, and it amused me greatly to see all those named women and the other things. It was the good life. But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices
Offers. In het buitenland.
abroad.
Dat was het breekpunt.
That was the breaking point.
Kinderen.
Children.
You were asked to do that?
Kon het niet.
Yes. And I couldn't do that.
En toen...
Would you like to stop for a moment, by the way?
No. And then I started to slowly break
in
down.
te storten. Ik had zelf
I
als
lived
kind nog
through
wel-
quite a lot as a child myself, and this really touched me deeply. Everything changed,
Maar
but that is the
wereld
world
waar
I
ik
found
uit-
myself in.
En toen
And
begon
then
ik
I
dus
started
dingen
to
te
refuse
wijzen
assignments
binnen
within my job. I could no longer do it, which made me a
het
threat.
directe gevaar.
I was no longer capable of functioning optimally.
Begon te rammelen.
My
Ik had
performance
dingen
started to shake and I had refused tasks. I had not participated.
Uiteindelijk
The purpose of the whole thing, eventually, in that world, is that they have everybody in their pocket. You need to be susceptible to blackmail. And blackmailing me proved to be very hard if I look back on it. They wanted to do that through those
Daar
children.
brak ik.
And that broke me.
Is that, you are not telling me something new, what they also do in politics?
Als je op internet,
If you Google this,
gaat googlen,
you'll
dan
find
kun je
enough
weer
worldwide
kijken,
witness accounts to know this isn't a Walt Disney fairy tale.
Walt Disney verhaaltjes. Het is
Unfortunately,
helaas zo
the
dat,
truth is
wereldwijd
that worldwide they have been doing this for thousands of years. I once studied theology, and even in the Bible you find references to these practices with Israelites. The reason the first 10 tribes were banished to Babylonia was because of these rituals with children, including the sacrificing of children. So this is pertinent. All this made me believe, because I realized there was more to life than meets the eye. There is a whole invisible world. It is real. You really do talk about a dark force and a manifestation of light. So, I resorted to studying theology to make sense of it all.
And psychology as well, if I remember correctly?
Yes, but that I did in my first life, because through commercial psychology, mass psychology, I was able to manipulate situations for my own benefit.
That is scary, because if you dig into that you find Tavistock Institute and mind control, MK Ultra, Monarch and the like.
Yes, that is correct, but that was all part of the job. Through training at the job, I got into that more deeply, because when you are making deals, you also need to manipulate the media. You have to manipulate lots of things because nothing can be seen as it is. Everything has to appear to be something different. You see the people as a flock of sheep. You put a couple of border collies and drive them in a direction. And to be honest with you, I still see that happening around me. People are still, through the systems and methods that we ourselves used to use, being treated in that same way, and it still works. People still don't understand how it really works and are still on the level of as long as I have my beer and whatever, completely self-absorbed, also a survival mechanism. I mean, it is the program after all. But you still see how stupidly easy it is to put people in a certain direction, when you are the one pulling the strings. That is
mass psychology.
Yes, and later, much later, in all those studies and discoveries, I found a document which they are claiming is bullshit, of course, the Protocols of Zion. And nowadays I recommend everyone to read the whole of that incredibly boring document. Just work through it, read it though.
We are also talking about Zionism.
Yes, of course. If you read the Protocols of Zion, and really study them and understand, then it is like reading the newspaper of the daily life. How from their position of ultimate power, and ultimate it has literally become. But that is only because the people don't stand up for themselves. They don't realize what reality is.
And we have all been programmed. If you dare to say you are against Zionism, then you are branded an anti-Semite.
The negative, you can say evil, the Luciferians, the Satanists, whatever you wish to call it, it is a real entity. I have found that what is written in the Bible, and not just the Bible, you can find it in so many books. There really has been a moment of separation from the manifestation of light, in which a group went their own way and are carrying an intense hatred, anger. The people who do not underestimate the severity of this are but few. Because this is an all-annihilating force that hates our guts. It hates creation. It hates life. And it will do anything to destroy us completely. And the way to do that is to divide humanity. Divide and conquer is their truth. Humanity is a manifestation of light. That is the true creation. As long as you divide them based on political parties, skin color, you name it, then you, from a Luciferian point of view that is, suppress the full capacities of your enemy, their full power. They can't stand up for themselves. Because if that would happen, the Luciferians would lose. Then this monster, the greedy monster, would disappear. I tell people about this old American general who puts an entire room of people in the dark. The eyes adapt to the darkness, but you can't see a thing. The general doesn't say a word and suddenly he flicks on a lighter, one little light. And due to the prolonged darkness, you experience a manifestation of light from a single point and everyone can slightly see each other again. And then he says, that is the power of our light.
Beautiful.
Unite. Unite. Come together.
What was the most important story of 2019 is currently getting buried. The coronavirus is the perfect way to move global consciousness away from Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel are currently literally in hiding to not be prosecuted as co-conspirators. They trafficked more than 1,000 women to Epstein, many of which were under the age of 18, some as young as 12.
This apartment block, he just had women on tap. He had girls on tap.
He had girls on tap. Jeffrey told me that he has slept with over 1,000 of Jean-Luc Brunel's models/victims.
And you believe that?
I do.
Virginia Roberts Giuffre was trafficked to British royalty Prince Andrew 3 times, starting when she was 17 years old. Andrew claims to have no recollection of meeting Virginia and says that this photograph could be doctored. A polite British way of saying fake news.
Because I have no recollection of that photograph ever being taken. Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
So as you know, Prince Andrew denies the allegations against him, and he says that this photo is a fake, that he was never there, and that he's not his arm, and they're not his fingers.
Those are his fingers. That is Andrew. This photo has been verified as an original, and it's been since given to the FBI, and they've never contested that it's a fake. And I know it's real. And he needs to stop with all of these lame excuses. We're sick of hearing it. This is a real photo.
And that was the first time you met him?
And that's the very first time I met him. And that's right before I was abused by him.
Epstein's properties were wired with hidden pinhole cameras. The Department of Justice found compact discs locked in his New York mansion safe with handwritten labels, young name plus name. Having this level of blackmail material makes Epstein an obvious target. Was Epstein a construct of intelligence communities collecting compromat, compromising material for geopolitical strategic advantage? If so, of course he couldn't live. State-sponsored manipulation of the elites at this scale would be unprecedented. For almost 30 years, he stayed under the radar of the general public. Only in the last year, we tripped over what seems to be one of the most important clandestine stories of the last 3 decades. Now we are being treated like little fucking kids that know the mainstream media narrative is bullshit. Generation Alpha will call us insane for not revolting against this caliber of cruelty and manipulation. Throughout the documentary, we will leverage 3 critical visual designs as foundational pillars. 1. The timeline. 2. The decision tree. 3. The questions. Let's begin keeping a tab on our most important questions. 1. How do we inspire tech and military intervention in capturing Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel? 2. How do we catalyze Prince Andrew and the royal family to come clean about their involvement? 3. How do we activate the use of information found on the compact discs? 4. Was Epstein a construct of intelligence communities for geopolitical strategic advantage? Here are 5 4-word phrases that will help us understand why this happened. Take my private jet. Come to my island. Stay at my mansion. I have young women. I'll write a check. Ethics seem to fly out the window when money, luxury, sex, and power are offered to humans. Epstein targeted the most primordial instincts of the global elite. He got more people to think with their dicks than with their hearts. He was an ego masseuse through pedophilic honeypotting. Imagine Epstein bouncing a very attractive 22-year-old woman on his knee to taunt powerful elites like a sapiosexual Hugh Hefner. Finding no signs of childhood trauma, what were the main reasons for Epstein's actions? A swift climb up the Bear Stearns hierarchy to become a limited partner after just 4 years in 1980. Advising the bank's wealthiest clients on tax mitigation strategies, violating Regulation D of the SEC, joining Tower Financial Corporation, which imploded as one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in American history, losing investors over $800 million in today's money. By 1991, Leslie Wexner, chairman and CEO of L Brands, with flagship companies Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie & Fitch, Express, Bath & Body Works, granted Epstein full power of attorney over his affairs. Maria Farmer has filed a sworn affidavit in federal court in New York alleging Leslie Wexner sexually assaulted her in the summer of 1996. Epstein attended Victoria's Secret fashion shows, hosted the models at his New York City home, and helped aspiring models get work with the company. He became fluent in offshore tax havens, reducing federal income taxes by 90% while being a part of the US banking system. This cocktail of hunger for sex and greed seems to be a perfect foundation for what transpired. Epstein was apparently moving money in the tens of millions in the early 2000s and began funding heterodox science research and education through his foundation. But where are Epstein's financial and trading records? His SEC filings? His taxes? What's the source of his wealth? In 2005, evidence of pedophilia came to the surface, which quickly avalanched into 50+ women with basically the same story against one guy. Anybody would be fucked for life if this happened to them, but not Epstein. With a quick visit to our timeline, we see that in 1953, Epstein was born. Then, in 1980, he became an LP at Bear Stearns. In 1991, Leslie Wexner granted him full power of attorney over his affairs. Also in 91, Robert Maxwell died with his stolen $570 million fortune in pension funds. In 95, Ghislaine Maxwell became Epstein's best friend and began creating playbooks for procuring girls. In 2001, Virginia Roberts Giuffre was trafficked to Prince Andrew. From 2002 to 2004, Epstein was moving tens of millions of dollars. He began funding heterodox science, and this even includes the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And in 2005, evidence finally arose of pedophilia, and that very quickly snowballed into 50+ women. His lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, who Virginia says she was trafficked to at least 6 times, the earliest when she was 16, helped negotiate the deal of a lifetime for Epstein. He ended up only pleading guilty to a state charge of procuring for prostitution a girl below age 18. How did our justice system produce such a careless result which essentially shut down an ongoing FBI probe into whether there were more victims and other powerful people who took part in Epstein's sex crimes? Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, said he offered a lenient plea deal because he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence, was above his pay grade, and to leave it alone. To give you an idea of what our justice system is supposed to do, after more than 100 women made public allegations against Harvey Weinstein, on February 24, 2020, he was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in prison. Guess what? Alan Dershowitz was on his legal team. Dude, why do you represent people like this? Why does Harvard even continue their relationship with you? Listen to these quotes from Dershowitz. The defendant wants to hide the truth because he's generally guilty. The defense attorney's job is to make sure the jury does not arrive at that truth. Here's another one. Judges are the weakest link in our system of justice. This guy is old code that is about to be archived.
Have a word meaning danger and opportunity. This is a time of great danger, yes, but it's also a time of great opportunity.
As we know throughout history, there's always 2 sides to every story. And this final chapter to the story that we're here experiencing now has yet to be written. What are kind of the best and worst case scenarios summed up? And what can people do to resist what is taking place right now?
Well, if we do nothing, then what they want is going to happen. What this cult has done has come out of the shadows over this virus scam and the lockdowns. It's come out of the shadows, it's walked into the room, and it's heard the door click behind it. And that door now is not opening again. And one person who is already feeling that is Bill Gates.
But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice. Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
Basically, an effort for man to merge with machine in a healthy way.
Yes.
To beat machines, you basically have to merge with machines.
Most likely, yes.
You're working to build basically an interface to the brain.
Yeah. Electrode to neuron interface at a micro level,
Okay, what is it? Like, I'm gonna have like a plug in my head that's gonna fit into a hard drive? Like, or how does that work?
Yeah. A chip and a bunch of tiny wires.
This would be implanted surgically. And it would do what? Could you input? Could you download Jim?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in the shadows, people like Gates are having their strings pulled as well. Even Gates, even Musk.
Speaking of Minnesota, a doctor and state senator from Minnesota, Scott Jensen, joins us tonight on the 702 communication line to talk about an interesting piece you put in the Star Tribune recently as well. So I don't know if you like Dr. Jensen, Senator Jensen, but thank you so much for joining us tonight, sir. And let's start with this. You and I communicated briefly yesterday via email, shortly on the phone. Have you yet seen the information that's going into these U of M models that the governor is using to make these decisions?
No, we have not. We have asked for those, and we were told by the governor's office that we would receive the data tonight. And so we're hoping to see what the assumptions are and what the data is. But at this point in time, we have not.
So I just want to be clear for our audience, sir. You've got a governor of a state that is making executive orders, stay-at-home orders, that right now is cratering your economy. We don't know what data is being used, and yet you as a state senator, as a doctor, have not seen that data that's being used for our governor to make these decisions.
No, we have not. And
does that not concern you? I mean, shouldn't the people of Minnesota be screaming right now?
Well, I think, Minnesota nice. We want to be good soldiers in that, but I think that people are starting to say, hold it now. We need to have a deeper understanding of this, and we're not getting it. I think that, in Minnesota, as a physician, I received an email last week from the Department of Health coaching me on how to fill out death certificates. And I've never really received coaching from the Vital Statistics Agency in terms of how to do a death certificate. But basically, I felt like they were saying, you don't have to have a confirmed laboratory test for COVID-19 in order to make the death certificate be COVID-19. So
Wait. Sir, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that what you just said, I think, is critically important. Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Well, last Friday, I received a 7-page document that sort of told me that if I had an 86-year-old patient that had pneumonia but was never tested for COVID-19, but sometime after she came down with pneumonia, we learned that she had been exposed to her son, who had no symptoms, but later on was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19. Now, we've not done that. If someone has the pneumonia and it's in the middle of a flu epidemic, and I don't have a test on influenza, I don't diagnose influenza on the death certificate. I will say this elderly patient died of pneumonia.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my heart is sinking right now as you're telling me this. You're a doctor. Why in the world would they be sending you out information to fill out death certificates, whether the person's been diagnosed with COVID-19 or not, but then to say in the death certificate this person's death was caused by COVID-19? That does not sound right to me.
I went to the person in our office who does most of the death certificates over the last 10, 20 years, and I said, does this sound right? I had her look at the documents that I printed off, and she said, well, we've always been told that you always put down just facts. You don't put down any probabilities. You don't put any presumptions down. It's just what you know. And so this is concerning. And it actually gets to your point, Chris. When we start talking about the data that goes into the modeling, we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we being forthright? Are we sharing with the public? Minnesota, North Dakota, we don't need to be having it sugar-coated. We want to know what's going into your modeling.
So with that being said, why would they want to skew the number of deaths due to COVID-19?
Well, fear is a great way to control people, and I worry about that. I worry that sometimes we're so darn interested in just jazzing up the fear factor that, sometimes people's ability to think for themselves is paralyzed if they're frightened enough. And that's not where I want people to be. I want people to say, we're going to get through this. I'm going to use my head. I'm going to go to different sources. I'm going to listen to different sources. And I'm going to think for myself, because that's what America's about.
Senator, if you don't mind, after this interview, if you can send me that 7-page document, and just for clarity, you were sent a 7-page document by who again?
The Department of Health.
Department of Health, saying, hey, fill this out, whether they test positive for COVID. That is stunning, sir. So Governor Walz had his conference call today. One of the things he mentioned is he's going to lay out, it sounds like, some ideas or a plan tomorrow about his statewide stay-at-home order. It was supposed to end on April 10th. He is going to have some changes to that. Do you have any new information regarding that, sir?
I don't, but there's certainly been a big push that we should be using more of a laser-focused approach rather than some sort of a broad-scale whack-a-mole kind of a thing. We've got landscapers and lawn preparers, and we've got dock workers and golf courses, and there's no reason to not let those people out there doing their job. And it isn't just about those occupations I mentioned. We're also talking about a tremendously revved up allergy season if we don't do these things. If we just let the weeds and the spring pollens go crazy, we're going to have a lot of kids with hay fever and asthma, and we know that the supply chain of asthmatic inhalers is potentially at risk. So we have to be very thoughtful when we do these things.
Doc, I got 2 more things for you, sir. Since you are a doctor, I think the people at home, because you just mentioned the fear factor, there's a lot of trepidation. There's so much uncertainty right now. As a doctor, as a state senator, and you look out to the horizon, there's a lot of varying information about when you guys are going to sort of get on the other side of this. I'm not asking you to make a certain prediction, but what's your best guess?
Well, I think it's going to be the end of April, but I think when we get there, I think it's going to be manageable. Our hospitals have done a wonderful job of preparing for it, and the fact of the matter is, we're not going to win this battle by kicking the can down the road. At some level, we're going to win this battle by having enough people become immune to it, by getting the disease, and it's a mild disease in 90% of the people. So the idea of minimizing this wave of the pandemic so that the next wave in the fall of the year will be greater, that doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense either.
Yeah, Doc, last question. I got about 60 seconds, sir. We'd love to have you back, but I actually originally brought you on because I thought you had a fascinating piece in the Star Tribune. If we can bring this up, Christy, but it says, hey, more thoughtful lockdown rules could spare loss and suffering. It was really geared towards, look, guys, we've got to obviously put public health first, but also be concerned about our economy. 30 seconds, sir. Why should people go read this piece?
Well, I think what it does is it says, listen, we're not going to have government make arbitrary decisions about what is an essential and a non-essential business. We're talking about measuring what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide some separation. We're trying to provide some social distancing. And if that's the case, we need to look at what's a safe occupation and what's not. So if 2 people are mowing a lawn on a golf course and they're 30 yards apart, that's not an issue. If we've got lawn people and they're working in solo or 2-man crews, this is not an issue. When government goes overboard, we lose our liberties and we may never get them back. So we need to be very careful. We can do it with a more laser precision rather than just whack-a-mole.
Doctor and Minnesota State Senator Scott Jensen, thank you so much for the time, Nancy. Boy, I think you made some major breaking news today, sir. And if you would, again, please email me that document, okay?
I will do that.
Thank you very much.
So let's get stopped in the street and talk to very seriously now about what's going on in the world. It's been a dramatic transformation, but it once was like that, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to talk about both of those sort of more extreme scenarios. So at first when that happened, how did it make you feel, and how did you deal with it and cope with it and carry on doing your work despite all this ridicule?
Something inside of me told me this was leading somewhere, and that if I kept going, then that somewhere would emerge. And when you go through the level of ridicule that I did in the early mid-90s, one of 2 things happens. Either it destroys you and you withdraw from the world, or you let go of the prison that most people live in, which is the fear of what other people think. Most people are not living their lives. They're not living who they are. They're living what they think others think they should be. And therefore, they're living a lie. They're living someone else's version of them. What happened to me as a result of that massive ridicule is that I let go of the fear of what other people thought. And when you do that, it's indescribable what that does, because no more mental gymnastics before you open your mouth. What do I say here?
They want you, don't they?
Hello? Hello, darling. Yeah, I'm in the middle of an interview. Would you like to be part of it? No. All right, that's good. I will. All right, darling. See you later. Bye. No, you were very good. You were very good. Bye. What I did was let go of that fear of what other people thought of me, and the freedom is indescribable. Because, like I say, you don't have the mental gymnastics. How do I put this so they won't think I'm crazy? What do I leave out so they won't think I'm crazy? You reach this point where this is me, and I don't give a damn if you think I'm crazy. So,
how did you do that?
Well, it's something that comes from letting go of the fear of what other people think. You know, I mean, if you ask people to write down, say, their top 5 fears, all over the world, invariably, the vast majority would include speaking in public, right? Mm. What is the fear of speaking in public? It's the fear of what other people think.
Ridicule, shame.
Yeah, it's the fear of what other people think. Mm. So when you stand on a stage, if you fear what other people think, you can be nervous because the power dynamic is with the audience, because they are going to decide if you feel secure or not. So you're scanning the audience as you're speaking and you're looking for reaction. What do they think of it? That power is there. Once you let go of the fear of what other people think, you can speak to 100 people or 1,000,000 people. It doesn't matter, because the dynamic has changed. The dynamic now says, this is my truth, and I respect your right to make of it what you will and come to your own conclusion. But this is my truth, and your reaction is not going to affect my truth. So however you react to what I'm saying, whether you like it, whether you laugh at it, or whether you condemn it, it doesn't matter to me, because it's my truth and I have a right to speak it. My truth and my security is not dependent on other people's reaction to me. That's I completely respect their right to respond as they choose, but I have a right too not to be affected by it.